Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Cooper, and I'm here with the Faith Leaders Roundtable. And we have part two of our series on the new policing policy. And we have our guest pastors here with us today, and we're going to let them introduce themselves as well. But we are now on part two. We started out with the what, and today we're going to spend the next 50 minutes talking about the why. So we talked about the what, and now we're going to talk about the why. And so we're certainly grateful. So I want to introduce the pastors. Pastor Myra Brown will be the leader of the discussion. But let's start out with some of the others, and that way when we get to you, Pastor Myers, you can just kind of take it away. So let's start out with Pastor Anderson. If you could introduce yourself and your church affiliation.
Blessings to everyone. I am Pastor Cynthia Anderson. I am the lead pastor of the Greater Faith Hope Center in our city, and I am elated to be an intricate part of what is happening in the city of Rochester.
And Pastor Harris.
Bless you all. I'm Pastor E.D. Harris, Ellis Harris, from the St. Philip International Church that is located in the heart of our city, 191 Bay Street of Rochester, New York. I am overwhelmed with joy to be a part of this phenomenal panel.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Anderson and Pastor Harris. And then Pastor Breedlove.
Good morning. I am Pastor Roger Breedlove from In Christ New Hope Ministry in the town of Henrietta. I am so excited about being a part of what we are doing in our new blueprint concerning our policing.
And thank you so much. And I am Pastor Cooper. I'm the pastor of Love Fellowship Worship Center, and also the founder of OurSpirit.online and the seminary. So I'm so very, very grateful for this opportunity to be with you today. That's the Civic Seminary. So we're grateful to be with you today. So now we also have Pastor Myra. She has been leading this effort. Just so you know, the Faith Leaders Roundtable has about 7 committees under it, and there's about 30 pastors and 30 congregate leaders that are a part of the Faith Leaders Roundtable. And one of the committees is social justice. And so she's leading up that team with these great pastors along with her. Yes. She's done a lot of work in this area and has a real passion for it, and is doing a great job in keeping the public informed about what needs to be done and what is being done. So with that, I am going to turn it over to her for her introduction, as well as to facilitate this portion of our program for you today.
Amen.
Hello, it's so good to be here. I am Reverend Myra Brown, and I pastor Spirit is Christi Church downtown in Rochester. And as Pastor Cooper said, it's such a delight to be on the panel with these amazing pastors. Rochester is so fortunate to have such amazing people who care so deeply about our city. And so we're here because I believe and we believe that we can do so much better than what we have right now. And so I'm just honored for us to be bringing this presentation to you to do part two, the why. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I just want to do a quick recap. Could I, Pastor Cooper, from where we left off on the what? So we left off on the what. Right? And so the what was, we introduced that we needed a new blueprint from the 1819 blueprint that Rochester's been working from, that is really steeped in white supremacy patterns, that is really harming our community, particularly the community of color. We need a new policing blueprint because it addresses the root causes, and that is the economic conditions that Black and brown communities are left in. It addresses the need to get rid of an 1819 blueprint that does not serve us, that is designed to attend to white anxiety protect white property and wealth while hurting and harming and traumatizing people of color and communities of color. And it also lacks commitment um, to give us true public safety, and it lacks a commitment to use de-escalation strategies. We saw that, and I gave a lot of examples at the first presentation. And it lacks consistent deployment of mental health services. So we talked about that, and it lacks dispatchment of people of color led and employed service providers. And we also talked about the importance of reallocating those funds in policing and supporting a defund refund process, which is, again, it's not getting rid of police. It is a reallocation of funds back into Black and Brown communities as a redress. So that was kind of our what that we introduced last time. Now, today is our why, right? So why? Why do we need to do that? We need to do it because we have a new policing blueprint will acknowledge the economic stress and trauma that produces poor outcomes for people, right? So when people don't have what they need, they start to think about, how do I get it? Right? And sometimes that thinking isn't quite right? Because when we all know that when we're desperate, we might make really poor choices about how to obtain particular resources. And then you overlay trauma on top of that, which people of color experience quite often through these white supremacy patterns that are not only in policing but in service providing, period, in our community. And so it's already a setup, right, for folks to not necessarily make the best decisions. And so redistributing resources from policing is really an excellent step in order to resource communities of color so that people have what they need. We have had sort of historical divestment in communities of color while we have had historical investment in white communities, right? So in particularly, like we spend $97 million on public safety. We should be able to get $97 million worth of public safety, but we're not getting it, right? We should be able to get our money's worth. And so, but we are not. We have too many people engaged in this work of public safety that just don't have the requisite knowledge and the right disposition, really, and to work in communities of color, and they end up doing more harm than good in our community. And so we need a new policing blueprint that will address all those nuances of what we have right now. Did I fix that? So I talked about the $97 million, right? 97 million of that, 87 million of that is on personnel, right? 85% of that personnel is white people who are not from our community, who live outside of our community, who don't understand our culture, who aren't necessarily socialized to see Black and Brown people's humanity. And I want to just put a pin right here to just say that what we have to understand is socialization is powerful, right? What we are socialized to do is often etched into us and inside of us. So if we're socialized to see everybody's humanity, then we'll see it. If we're socialized to only see our own and only feel safe with our own, then that's kind of what the power of socialization will do and have the effect on people's lives, right? So when I was growing up, my parents socialized us, right, to eat coon, right, raccoon. And it was a power of socialization. I grew up and I thought, everybody was eating coon, right? And it wasn't until I got to be an adult that I realized, everybody's not eating coon, right? And that there was actually a history, a racialized history of Black and Brown folks in the South who were deprived of the chief meats. And so they had to survive and they did what they needed to do, right? And so socialization is really powerful. I'm going to keep saying that because we know that racial socializations in this country have been steeped in ideas of superiority for white people and inferiority for people of color. And if that's what you're socialized in, and we're also in those cultural waters, Black and Brown people will always be in trouble where it comes to public safety and policing if we don't change an 1819 policing blueprint. And so we need to really redesign the idea of public safety and what that means, right? And we spend the 10 million on equipment like drones and tanks and bulletproof vests and aggressive training that ends up harming us more so than it does those in the white community. Chemical weapons, riot gear, guns, etc. And we can do better. We can use those funds for something.
Yeah, Pastor Myra, I'm a
Yes.
numbers person. If you go back to that previous slide, and just I'm doing fuzzy math, so it's not absolutely accurate, but it's pretty accurate. If we're saying that we're spending 85%, we're spending $97 million in public safety, and 85% of that $97 million is going into white employees. That means that on an average, about $120,000 is going into roughly 650 white families.
That's right.
So if you just look at that economically and you had 650 families that you impacted in our community with a job that they made $125,000 a year.
Yep.
Think about the economic impact that you would have in our community. So when you say that we're investing it outside of our community, when, I don't know, 75% of the police officers or public safety workers live outside of our city, we're literally making the suburbs rich.
That is exactly right. Particularly when you think about 41% of the population in Rochester are Black and brown folks, right? And so it's not even proportionate in terms of where we're making our investment, right? And you're right, we are making the suburban areas rich, but we're also paying for our own oppression, right? We're paying for our own harm, right? And who does that? Like, that doesn't even make any sense, right? To pay somebody to traumatize you, to harm you, right? To reward them for that. Like, we don't do that with our children, and yet we're doing it with white employees in the suburban areas, right?
Also, Pastor Myra, I just want to piggyback up just a little bit on what Pastor Cooper say, and I think that's why it's so important for us, even if I am as far as the defunding and refunding. So if we're spending that type of money in those type of places in the suburbs, but if we would funnel those resources with our community, what kind of community would we really have? And even just the morale, the attitude in our community, what would it really look like? It would look like a community where that we know that we really do care about each other. And so I think the defunding and the refunding, that's where that plan comes in. That we're not saying that we don't want officers or whatever we want to call them, but what we're saying is that we're not just going to pay you just to pay you. And you said earlier about us even paying for our own
oppression.
Oppression. No, we're not doing it. So.
Yeah, that thank you for that. I mean, the economic deprivation, if we're investing, if we're over-investing, which this is over-investing, right, in suburban areas and communities, we are under-investing in our own communities. So you're absolutely right. That's why everybody should support the defund, refund call for reallocating those resources. So the why, again, is that as we redefine public safety, it's essential, right? Because it allows for us to have coordinated work and to build in coordinated work across and within agencies, to build in systemic accountability, to increase protection and public safety, of which we have very little, if any, right now. You know, I mean, we tried to get a conviction for Daniel Prude, zero bill came back, right? And in this community, I believe I had a meeting with Sandra Dorley, and I asked her the question, like, how many police have you charged right? And given all of the physical abuses and the excessive uses of trauma in this community, I asked her, how many have you prosecuted? And she said, "Oh, Reverend Myra, I've prosecuted lots of police. I'm one of the few who have done that." And I said, "For police brutality?" And as she began to name, I think it were 5 cases, maybe 6, they were all drunk driving cases. They were all drunk driving cases. And the only one that was for police brutality was Christopher Pate. And that was after the mayor kind of came out and supported charges being brought up on the officers who beat Christopher Pate, mistaken identity. It was so egregious and it was caught on tape. But the reality is that that was one case out of the hundreds and hundreds of cases that people have complained about in terms of the police brutality, excessive uses of force. And so we are not safe. And so we really need new agreements about how to protect our community, even with, district attorneys' offices and those agencies that work in conjunction with our public safety system. So the why is then, if we do that, if we do this new policing blueprint, we can go from poor outcomes, right, to protect people of color and have real public safety, to improved outcomes, right? And we get to this place where we are not treating social and racial problems as criminal ones, right? That under this 1819 policing blueprint perspective, the way it's functioning now, it is believed that those problems require a violent or surveilling response. And we're saying no, they do not, right? These are social problems. Social problems require social solutions, right? Not violent and surveilling ones, and unjust ones. And the why is that we need to address the white supremacy patterns in criminal justice, right? We can actually do something about that. We can acknowledge that it's a problem. We need to dismantle those white supremacy patterns and end the treatment, the disparate and harmful treatment of Black and Brown folks in this community. And that will allow us, this new blueprint, to do the work of rewriting and redoing state laws that give permission to such patterns. And it actually puts justice back in the justice system. Right now, there's an incongruency, right? It doesn't fit. What they say doesn't fit what they do, right? And so it's a lack of incongruency. And so we can actually create a justice system that practices justice, and not a justice system that practices injustice and that's incongruent with its mission.
Pastor Myra, if I may.
Yeah.
So to the elderly mother, or that is at her home and in the city, and the drug dealers that are selling drugs in that area, or rather, big fight breaks out. How would the public safety operate in those forms when there's real crime, true crime that is happening?
Yeah. So here's the nice thing, right, about a new policing blueprint. Those are social problems. The drug dealing issue is a social problem. So are the people who are fighting, right, on the streets. Right now, we expect the police to deal with everything. A new policing blueprint actually looks at a different question, like how do we create public safety, right? How do we get our young people to not want to make the decision to join the drug dealer on the corner? How do we provide resources in the community so that our young people actually can choose something else other than slinging drugs, right, on the corner?
Right.
And without community resources, we leave them with very few choices, right, in terms of what they're even selecting. The same thing would be true for the folks who are fighting on the corner, right? People fight because they just don't have skills that they have necessarily been taught about how to address conflict, right, in their lives, right? How to deal with emotional triggers, right? In these relationships that they're having. We can actually take and allocate again funds in our community to really help our young people, right, have the skills that they need to manage conflict, to transform conflict, right? We have all kinds of classes on conflict transformation, right, in higher education, but that doesn't just need to be in higher education. We can put those skills and those resources in our community, right? And again, I would go back to say that when we're talking about defund, refund, we are still saying that there are police on, on the payroll. We are saying that that we don't need $97 million worth of them, right?
Right,
And
right.
so people can still call the police. But what's nice about this new policing blueprint that is, as we redo the blueprint, we actually can redefine public safety. We can write in what we think and recommend what we actually think the skills and the training needs to be, so that the new folks who show up to those events, if those folks show up to those events, those new folks will have new skills, right? They will have been retrained and new expectations about how to see the humanity, right, of all people, and particularly people of color, right? So that they don't show up at, to follow up on a drug deal tip or a fight, and that grandmother's grandson, who might be part of either one of those, instead of being taken downtown and having their day in court, they end up in the morgue, right?
Right.
That's the issue at hand right now, is that for Black and brown kids, it's not guaranteed that even if the police show up, that it's going to end well. So we need a new policing blueprint to see their humanity.
It also
That's good.
seems as though we have a system that is set up to treat every situation as a criminal act.
Mhm.
So, like Pastor Marty said, if you've got drug dealers outside of your house, that's a criminal act. It seems as though the police or whoever you call should deal with that in one way. But if you're having a psychotic episode, that's not a crime.
That's right.
So a different resource or a different process would respond to that. Because, I'm like the grandmother. If there's drug dealing, robbing, and trafficking and stuff like that, I want to call the police, and I want the police to come, and I want to treat it as a criminal activity is going on outside of my house. However, if the kids are just being bad, that's not necessarily criminal. It doesn't require the same response. And it seems like when we engage the police, all they know how to do is to treat everything as a criminal act.
Mhm.
That's exactly right, Pastor Cooper. And, I agree with you. I think, if it's a crime, the police should deal with it as a crime. I think I threw in this whole idea around resources, creating other opportunities, because where Rochester is trying to go right now is decriminalizing, right? For example, the sale of marijuana, like that's coming, right? And so that will soon become a social problem if that happens, and not necessarily a criminal one, right? And so we're going to have to deal with what changes are coming down the pike, and still be thinking kind of broadly about how do we keep our people safe and keep our communities safe. So you're absolutely right. Right now, they need to show up and get the drug dealers off the street, right? So that our kids are safe. They can go to school, they can do their thing without worrying about being harassed or being caught in between some, turf thing that's happening in the community. So absolutely right. But a new policing blueprint actually gives us an opportunity to have a new look at how we keep our community really safe.
And
One of the
Pastor
things I can,
Myra, even when there is a crime of drugs or a fight or a suspect of stealing something out of a store, it should not result in the police being brutal to handle it. There should be, training, proper training for every situation. We discipline our children. We have to discipline them according to age, to weight, what they can handle. And everything doesn't mean, it's going to result in us going to a funeral for our loved one because the police didn't know how to handle the situation.
One of the things that I want to appreciate that you brought out is that will be probably a question that will consistently ring as we have went through this, is that we're not saying get rid of the police.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So that is not what we're saying, even in this defund refund. We're not saying, so there will be, if you know, right now in the city of Rochester, the homicide rate is higher than it was last year. But there will be investigators to investigate homicide.
Right.
There will be police to deal with the crime. So this is not what we're saying, get rid of them. We're just reallocating some of those funds to other areas that can better assist and help our Black and brown people.
Let me also, Pastor Myra, also what we're getting back to is the thing that I think all of us, except for Pastor Harris, because he's the youngest here, that everything was raised, all of us was raised by a village. And so it's from a standpoint of we're not talking just together. It's going to be different parts of our community where we really are controlling our narrative and how our community is run, the things that are being done, the respect we're putting back into our families, and understanding that I don't have to have a talk with my son that's 14 or 15 years old every time that he leaves the house on if you get stopped by police or if this goes on. So we're coming together as one community, as they do on a regular basis. And we are controlling what we want our community to look like, and to who's doing what they're doing. So we want people who have our community best interest at heart to be there, and not just come and I'm just coming to collect a paycheck, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the premises that I believe in, and I think it's true, is that we all have somebody that we will listen to, right?
Yes.
That when we are at our worst, right? There's that one person somebody needs to call, and it's over, right? It's just over, right? So for me, it was my grandmother, right? No matter what if you got a hold of my grandmother, whatever I was doing that was out of line, it was done, right? And as you are laughing, I could tell that each of you have that person, right, in mind. So a new policing blueprint actually can integrate that, right? Like even that drug dealer, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a big mama, right? There's somebody that you could call. That young person is acting up on the street, right? There's somebody who could be called, who could end this, right? I'm that person for my nieces and nephews. Actually, that for my all of my siblings, right? I'm the youngest, but if they're acting out, and you call me and I show up, I promise you, it's over.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Right?
Accountability.
Relationship that we have, and
Yeah.
so we don't have to be stuck in these power relationships we currently have with policing. We actually can redesign something that
I love it.
really works.
Absolutely.
That's
Myra,
a good comparison. I'm sorry.
Yes.
As you talked about us having accountability to somebody's voice, and that is a reckoning that caused us to shift back into gear.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know that if your son or your daughter is pulled over and they pull out their card and say, here's my attorney, that shakes that officer to know somebody is accountable for me, is a mediator. You can't do what you want to do because I have an attorney. And a lot of people don't know that. But what does it do for a mom like me to make sure when my boys got to that age of 14, 15, and 16, here's a card. Here's our attorney. If the police pull you over while you're driving, say, call my attorney. That shakes them because they know they have to be accountable to somebody that is like them, superior, an attorney. And, a lot of people don't know that. So the police have at it. And a lot of times it results in what? Death.
Yeah.
abuse, brutality, if not death. It's a brutal encounter, and that's not what we deserve. Not while you're sitting in your plush, suburban houses, and you got your Porsche, your Mercedes, and we're, what I'm saying, we're suffering, but you are oppressing us even worse by even just being stopped for a ticket, running a red light or doing nothing. And if I can say this, I remember, when the police officer was shot, we were at church, a couple of weeks after that. And we got ready to leave. So we were parked on the street and everybody pull out and keep going. My daughter pulls out. Here comes all these police surrounding her car. What did she do? We just left church. So I walked over to the officer. I said, I'm Pastor Anderson and I'm her mom. What did she do? Back up from the car. And he's just being aggressive. And I said, no, I know my rights. She just pulled off away. Why did you pull her over? And then finally he said, ma'am, the real deal, and he turned red. He said, the real deal, we are all scared. Being scared doesn't give you a right
Exactly.
to be oppressive to somebody that just pulled off from the curb. After leaving there, I get pulled over on St. Paul. And I'm like, what the what? Ma'am, we're told to pull over everybody that have multiple people in their cars. For what? You're asking teenage children for an ID, and no, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. And so, we've got to change things, and it's got to be an investment to change. And we're not going to be quiet until we see change.
Awesome.
What you describe again is what flows from an 1819 blueprint, right? He was attending to his white anxiety, right? That fear of other. And so again, you're absolutely right. Like those things should not happen. And that's why we need a new policing blueprint. We got to get rid of 1819. We need a 21st century policing blueprint.
Their minds.
Again, it means leaving traditional narratives, right? And traditional responses to crime, as we just got through saying. It means focusing on investment, right, towards thriving communities and positively impacting communities of color. We complain about, what's happening in our communities, but if we don't have resources, we won't be able to change, right, those outcomes. Right, and so again, it also means that that we will stop funding policing and public safety under a catch-all model. Pastor Cooper mentioned it earlier, right? That many of the social problems we expect police to deal with, right? Keeping the peace and homelessness, right? Homelessness is not a crime, and yet homeless people are having horrific experiences with policing interactions that are aggressive. Prostitution, right? Theft. And granted, these are crimes, but again, when we talk about having a country where people have to be thinking about how do I get stuff, right? Because they're looking at communities outside of themselves that have what they need, right? Gang violence. We have to not only ask about, why do we have what the gang violence is that's happening in our community, but why do we have it? Why are our children choosing to be part of gangs? What is it that gangs provide for them that we can't put resources in our communities to provide for our young people? Again, we talked about the drug dealing, right? School security. We talked about the school to prison pipeline. In Rochester, we made some decisions to take police out of some of the high schools and some of the schools, but partly because we were even arresting students, right, and putting them through the criminal justice system before they even had a start in life. They had criminal records, right, for fighting in school. And my son, I remember when he was in high school, he got into a fight and somebody pulled a fire drill, and I didn't realize that pulling a fire drill, having a fight, and having kids not move quickly during a fire drill, that actually kicked it up to like a misdemeanor. And I was like, what? Right? It was in high school. So there are all these nuances around how even our children are not safe in the ways in which we think about this sort of catch-all model of policing. Domestic violence, right? certainly we need to make sure that we keep victims safe, but we also need to be then resourcing people so that we can mitigate, right, these childhood issues and these reasons that people have not learned how to manage their anger and manage their frustration and and have access to counseling. Right, and we expect police to do these things and every other unexpected crisis, right? And we can retool it, right? We can actually, as Pastor Cooper said earlier, we can redefine what's real crime that police need to be attending to, and what's really a social problem that really requires investment. Um, and when we do that, then we allow public safety to exist outside of police interaction, right? And we understand that public safety, a new policing model around public safety, allows us to think about the full health and the full safety of a community, right? And we can rebuild trust. We can attend to historical trauma and current trauma, and we can build in accountability. And I think that's a great reason to do it. And it also, as I say, it deals with the historical pieces, right? Over time, law enforcement has subjected vulnerable community members of color to more systemic violence than those who are white in our community, in attempts to address, social problems and not necessarily addressing those social problems. But here's the key, right? Through an 1819 policing blueprint, police are addressing those social problems through a particular lens, a way in which they're seeing it, a lens of inferiority, a lens of white racial anxiety, a lens of white dominant power, right? If we just looked at, the killing of Tyshawn Jones, the most recent, as the police officer who was in mental health crisis and who was Black, as he set up sort of this Wild Wild West version of you versus me, right? It became about his white policing power against Tyshawn's Black mental illness, right? It never should have been that. Like, that's not the power dynamic. That's not the relationship that should have been um, set up, because that is going nowhere, and it did go nowhere, right? Tyshawn ended up in the morgue with a mental illness because there wasn't a real plan about making sure that everybody went home that day,
Wow.
right? There wasn't a real plan about, what team do I need? If that officer had just thought, what team do I need around mental health, de-escalation, right? Um, and racial connection, right? Racial and cultural connection. Like, what team do I need to de-escalate this and to make sure that this young man gets the help that he needs and we all get to go home? Um, there wasn't there. He called for I think either a beanbag or a taser, but then he didn't wait for it. Like, he didn't wait for what he called for. He didn't have any other team, and he was really ineptly trained to address this young Black man who was in a mental health crisis. And so, we really need more than what we have right now. As a result, I suggested that, until we fix this blueprint, that, we have 50% Black officers show up on the ground when there's a Black person in mental health crisis, and that a Black officer is actually in charge of giving instruction on the ground. Why did I suggest that? So that that person's humanity can be seen, and so that race doesn't get in the way of creating a real plan, right? So that white anxiety doesn't get in the way of creating a real plan, um, and a lens of inferiority. And so I think, our current situation is begging for us to change what we have, right? So the potential use of institutional power and the ongoing systemic violence in the name of law enforcement and law and order is flawed. It's flawed from the very beginning. It continues to erode trust. It continues to traumatize. It violates our sense of public safety. And it doesn't allow us to have thriving communities. And the impact of that is that, number one, we are not safe. We are not all safe. Number two is that we're losing a whole generation of young people, and we're fostering fear in communities. We are broadening the divide of distrust and resentment on the current blueprint. And we can do something about that. Like, we don't have to be stuck with what we have, and we don't have to nibble around the edges. We can actually say, I said this to Senator Jeremy Cooney, who's a state senator, that, why couldn't our state lawmakers just write a piece of legislation right now that says any policing blueprint that was designed in 1800s needs to go, that communities are being asked to redesign them, because we all know what the thinking was in 1800s. Like, that's not a secret, right? There was lynchings happening, right? There was massive police brutality. There were, Jim Crow laws were still in effect. I mean, we know that we were steeped in a culture of white supremacy ideologies. And so there's really no reason any of us should be trying to hold on to an 1819 policing blueprint because we're afraid that we won't have enough police when we call them, right? We should just redo the darn thing, right? And do it right so that all people are safe. And I think I said this in the first part one, that, if we are not at the table for this redesign, we are going to be on the menu, stay on the menu, right? And that's what's happening right now.
Pastor Myra, could it be that I want to go back a little bit and piggyback on what Pastor Anderson said? She said a couple of times when she was giving some illustrations, she used the word that the officers were saying that they were fearful. So could that be kind of like a trump card that they're using for us to, let's just say, have pity on them? Mm-hmm. So that would tell me that they're not equipped to handle our community. So if they're saying that, we was afraid, so therefore that's why we were told to stop every car and all those kind of things. So if that's true, then again, that speaks to the 1819. It speaks to that we do need to have a new policy, a new blueprint in place, that you're not afraid. So if you're afraid, you don't need to be here anyway.
Right.
If you don't know how to deal with us, and I'm not talking about dealing with us because we are some foreign creature. No, if you don't know our culture, you don't have any business in this particular line of vocation whatsoever. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to look at, even when we start defunding and refunding, having qualified people that know our culture. And it would have to be predominantly Black. I mean, let's just be honest about the whole thing, until someone else has shown that they do know how to talk to us, and we understand everything in which you understand. So I think it's very important that if that fear factor is there, and they're using that as a trump card, they don't need to be there anyway.
And it's the mentality that I'm going to get you before you get me. And that's the mentality that everybody was suspect, right? Because a police officer was shot. So no matter who you are, no matter what you look like or what you drive, everybody in the city of Rochester now is suspect. And I'm going to get you because it's a possibility you'll get me. Unfair. Rip up the 1819 mentality. Rip up that, what we've been going by, and invest in making some changes that are healthy for our community, for the generation that is to come and the generation that is being born now. They deserve for us to rip that up, and they're not born into this system that is oppressive, depressive, and killing us.
Even if you go a little bit deeper too, they have in their mind certain levels or where we should be as Black and brown people. So if we're driving a nice car, we get pulled over because the first thing they ask, well, who car this is, who's driving this car? What do you mean who car it is? So they have this perception that we should be living a certain way, living at the bottom, so they have that perception. And then when they see us out of their mind, out of the norm for them, they want to start questioning it and make problems for it. So this is why they need to know us, and look like us. So we can have nice stuff too, just like they can have nice stuff. And we don't have to sell drugs to do it. We work too, just like they work. But I want to ask this question, Pastor Myra. Why is it, since we're dealing with the why is this such a hard thing to grasp? Why is this such a hard thing to get forward to the Senate, to the powers that be that can make this change and implement this or dismantle the 1819 blueprint? Why is this so hard, a hard transition?
Well,
excuse me, Pastor Myra, I know I don't supposed to be taking the lead. Can I kind of answer this just a little bit? Just kind of an input here. And I think the why, Pastor Harris, is because change is not change until we change. And tradition is probably one of the hardest things we know, even from a biblical standpoint. When Jesus dealt with the religious establishment, they were so steeped in their tradition that they would rather die than switch. These guys are so deep in what they always perceive us to be. I had a situation where I have an uncle that was in the armed forces, and one of the things that he did, this guy was of course bunking with him, and he was a white guy. And so I guess the guy watched him for about 6 months, and he just said to my uncle one day, he said, "You know what, I just want to apologize to you." And my uncle said, "Apologize for what?" He said, my parents always told me to watch out for Black people. They told me that you guys were not clean. He said, "You're probably one of the cleanest guys I met." They said that they would steal everything that you had. I didn't see any of those things. So I just want to apologize. And then he said this to my uncle. He said, "I wonder what else they've lied to me about."
Oh boy.
Wow.
Oh boy.
I thank you for that. In addition to that, what I would add is I think you hit it. Pastor Breedlove kind of hit it when he said fear, right? Fear is a big reason that we don't change what we're doing currently. And in terms of, is it used manipulatively for us to feel sorry for the police? I think there's a manipulative part. I'm not sure that it's intentional for people, but I think that it's effective. When police officers say that they're afraid, I generally hear lots of folks from the white community say, "Yeah, that's right. What are you supposed to do when you're afraid, right?" And so what I often say is, whose job is it to manage their fear? Is it the job of the person with power, or the person who has less power, who is powerless? I am a professional nurse by training, and what I have learned as a professional, it is always the job of the professional, the person who holds the most power in that relationship, to manage their own fear. In fact, we know that in fear, the experience of fear, we have 3 phases, right? When you're feeling afraid: fight, flight, or freeze, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. And so what white people get is the freeze part. What people of color get, right, is the fight part, right? And often, sometimes white people get the flight part, but they just kind of step out and they leave them alone. For the problem with us is that police officers stay in the fight part with us, right? The aggressive part with us, the violent part with us. And so the assumption is that that's the only way to address fear. But psychologists have already told us that it's not, right? We actually have 3 options when we're afraid: fight, flight, or freeze. And so, as people of color, we have to deal with fear all the time, and we have to manage our fear. We actually don't get to go around just because we're afraid, right? And take people out, right? And pummel them, right? Without any accountability. And so why would we, as a community, say that it's okay for public safety practitioners like police to do that? That just doesn't make any sense. It's nonsensical thinking is what that is. And it's thinking that comes from a place of racial anxiety. And we can help our community with that, right? By asking them to just really stop and think about, does that really make good sense? It doesn't. It doesn't make good sense at all. And so I would say that fear is the biggest piece. And I think we need thought leaders, politicians,
I
who know
love
how
it.
to get people through fear, right? Jesus led us through fear. Those of us that are people of faith, right? Had it not been for the Lord, right, who continued to say, "Fear not, for I
Yes.
am,"
That's right.
right? Um, and so I think our biggest responsibility in this is to help people move through their fear and to
Mhm,
trust,
mhm.
right? To trust that we can actually create something better than this, that we can actually get to a place where um, by creating a new policing blueprint, we are attending to our fear, right? We are attending to our anxiety.
Mhm. Pastor Myra, I remember being in the courtroom with somebody, and the judge asked the lady what happened, and she was a white lady. She said, "Your Honor, I pulled on Central Park, and I saw a lot of black guys standing on the corner, and there was no way I was going to stop at the stop sign, and we're all in the courtroom like, what?" And I thought about how many of people do she represent their mindset.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't doing anything, they were just standing there. And
Mm-hmm.
that deemed you, she said, I was afraid.
Okay.
So she ran through the stop sign and the police pulled her over. We have to dismantle. And like you said, they have to do it. Some things police officers have to do themselves, but it also comes from improper training, because those are the things you got to deal with the police's mental state.
Yeah, Pastor Cynthia, I'm not even sure that it's improper training because in white communities, whatever the training is, in white communities, white people are safe. They don't, that training shows up in a safe way in white communities and it shows up in a non-safe way in black and brown
So they're
communities.
just not applying
No, no.
what they
I
know.
think that, I'm sorry. I think that we have a heart issue. Um, look at it like this. Uh, I'm not a dog kind of person. We had dogs when I was growing up, mean dogs. I'm just not a dog person, right? So if you hire me as a dog catcher
Mhm.
and you give me a taser, a gun, and 750 other dog catchers with guns and tasers also,
Okay.
I'm gonna treat that dog. And that's what we're dealing with. I'm afraid too, just like that lady. I'm afraid too. The only difference is you got a gun and you got 750 other officers with guns as well, and we're all afraid. Who do you think gonna lose that battle? And
Okay.
so I think we're really dealing with a hard issue. I don't think we're creating policy to cover up and to make people act right because we're trying to get them to go against what's really in their heart. In order to really fix this, we got to get rid of the hearts that have a adverse opinion and reaction to Black people.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. That's why we're saying we need police officers and peace officers that are in our communities that understand our community, because there's certain ways that every culture has a communication mechanism, and we communicate in different ways. Italians, they say talk with their hands. We tend to escalate our voices and our pitch goes up. And
Right.
so when we talk to each other, if you're not familiar with our culture, you might think that I'm resisting arrest. But in reality, I'm just asking a question at a high-pitched voice. And
Right.
so if you understand that, you understand I'm not trying to fight you. I'm not trying to resist arrest. I'm asking a question, and we know how to deal with each other better. And that's because we've been raised like that, and we understand that, listen, You don't need to be arrest. You don't need to arrest every kid for everything. Sometimes it's worse to take them home to their mama.
So true.
You understand the culture. You understand the culture. You understand the culture of a 9-year-old girl who has been through trauma most of her life, and all she knows is to fight and to scream and
or to run.
Anybody touch her, particularly a grown man. When you understand that, because you've been around that, you understand. As a man, you just don't walk up on a 9-year-old girl and grab her. That's not something that you do, you know. But if you don't know, you don't know. It's a crime. Everything is a crime. She's a crime because she's walking down the street because she didn't want to be in a house where her mama was stabbing her daddy. She didn't want to be in that house, and so. But that's not a crime, and you don't deal with it like that, you know. So I think that we're dealing with a real heart issue. Man, I really wish there was a way that we could profile or somehow test for racism, because racism, I believe, is a cult and a demon. And then just have the authority to just say, you know what, you can't work here anymore. And then bring in people who have the heart for the people and understand the cultures in which they police, or whatever they do to us, you know, so they can deal with us as we need to be dealt. Now, on the other side of that, we got to quit doing stuff that caused us to have to call the police in the first place. So I don't want to ignore that issue either. You know. So,
Pastor Cooper, can I just say something that you triggered for me is why your comments are so significant in terms of developing new policing blueprint is that it was the heart of white supremacy that designed the current blueprint. And so you were right when you talked about it's a heart issue, right? And so the heart of the current policing blueprint from 1819 felt some really significant harmful things about people of color, right? That we were dangerous, that we were lazy, right? That we put white women in jeopardy, right? That we were going to treat white people the way that they treated us historically. So then we need to be kept down, and we need to be surveilled, and we need to be controlled, and we need to be dominated. Right? And so we have to understand, when I talk about white supremacy patterns and thinking and frameworks in this current 1819 policing blueprint, that is exactly what we're talking about, right? And that comes straight from the heart because of socialization, right? Racism is historical, it's contextual, right? And it's contemporary. And so you're absolutely right. I so appreciate, you know, those examples that you gave. And that's why we're saying that, you know, a starting place is to get rid of this 1819 policing blueprint. It can never help us. We can never take the heart of white supremacy and make public safety work.
Right.
Exactly.
Because, you know, actually what we're trying to do, we're trying to put a continuous Band-Aid on something, getting back to what Pastor Cooper said, that is a heart problem. See, what we're trying to do, we're trying to deal with behavioral modification. We're trying to get them to modify their behavior. But it's actually like what the Bible says. God is looking for heart transformation. Until that heart, if that heart is not changed, I cannot, if I am a white person, in all honesty, if that person is not born again, if that person not born of the Spirit of God, he can't treat you right. I don't care how many laws, I don't care how much we try to legislate, it won't happen because it's not in their heart. Now, this, again, as you said, Pastor Myra, this 1819 blueprint, that was straight from their heart. And so they've taught that to their children forever and a day. I'll tell you, and I don't know all you guys' background, but I'm willing to go on record and wager and bet. I'm not a betting man today, but I used to be. But to make the statement that none of us was taught to hate people in our families. That just wasn't what our families taught. We didn't do that. Now, did people mistreat us? Absolutely. And our parents told us about those things, but just to say, you know what, you're better than this particular white person here, you're better than these people. Our family just didn't teach that. So unless the heart of the core and the center of an individual's heart is changed, they can't do it. It's not, we can do all that we want. They can't do it. And that's why this thing has to be dismantled. It has to be ripped up. It has, and all of us have to be at the table. If not, then our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will continue to revisit this thing on a regular basis.
We have to do a better job of vetting in the police. Well,
listen, this has been a great spirited conversation, but we are out of time.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper, do I have time to do this last frame right here?
We have to do this last frame right here.
All right, great.
Let's do it this way. Pastor Myra, I want you to finish up here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we'll go around very, very quickly, and then we'll be good for today. And then we have the part 3 coming up next week.
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
Pastor Myra, it's on you.
So the final comment really is, a new policing blueprint, right, gives us a new culture, a new philosophy, a new way to think about public safety, and it builds in new accountability. It allows people to know what is permissible and what is not permissible and what the real expectations are. And it allows us to do 2 things, right? We can create a new mission for public safety and a new vision. And we need new ones from 1819. And so a new policing, a public safety mission could really be, we could write in to accelerate an end to racism policing by focusing on public safety practitioners and partnership models that create thriving communities for all people. And we can create a new vision in writing a new policing blueprint, a new vision that says that we will create a racially just policing blueprint that fosters community trust, investment, safety, and mutual partnerships. Now that, I think, is a formula that will allow everybody to feel safe and will give us the restart that we need.
Any final words before we move on to the rest of the roundtable? Pastor Myra.
No, all I would just say is, I would encourage people to push past their fear and to ask themselves, can we do more? Can we do better? Can I trust God for the best practices in public safety? And if the answer is yes, then I would say support a new policing design. Push your leaders and politicians to support a new policing design and to encourage them to not nibble around the edges, don't hold on to traditions that don't serve us, and join us, right, in creating something so much better and so much more healing and helpful in Rochester and the state of New York, which is a new policing blueprint.
Awesome. Pastor Breedlove, any final words?
As a community, we know who we are and we know where we want to go. So come join us.
And Pastor Harris?
I encourage you again to embrace this a new blueprint for policemen. The scripture says that old things are passed away and behold, all things become new. And so we need to really start embracing this change and this newness that will be better for you, better for us, and more importantly, better for our children and our grandchildren. Again, I stated this before, that God knew we could not, I could not. I know Pastor Breedlove said that I'm the youngest one of the bunch, and I appreciate that. But I could not endure slave. I couldn't do it. Right. I wasn't built for it. And so, again, we should not allow our grandchildren to have to endure this type of policemanship. We have to do the work and get the change in place so that they can have a better life.
And Pastor Anderson?
Will you help us shift $97 million that will go to protecting our legacy, our future generations? This, what we're dealing with, this 1819 model is a curse. And we believe that if you stand with us, we can break the curse, and socially, economically, spiritually, mentally, physically, we will have one of the greatest cities ever. Thank you so much for standing up with us.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. My final word is, who puts new wine in old wineskin?
Oh, God.
Listen, we are so grateful that you all joined us for our conversation today on the why of the new why of the new blueprinting policy. I can't get that right today.
All right.
I couldn't get it right at the beginning. I can't get it right. The new policing blueprint. That's what I say. So we want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want you to stay tuned, because on next week, we will be talking about the how. Okay, now that we've understood what it is and why we need it, we're going to spend next week talking about how can we get this done, who is required, what is required, and what work must be done, and how you can participate and be involved in this process. So we will get to that next week. So stay tuned. Once again, thank you so much for joining the Faith Leaders Roundtable, our criminal justice subcommittee. Also want to thank Civic Seminary for helping with this, and also ourspirit.online. Thank you so much. And we look forward to you participating again next week. Please share this with everyone that you know. Please like it. Also, you can like our Facebook page, the Faith Leaders Roundtable Facebook page. Please like that as well. Once again, thank you so much, you awesome, wonderful pastors. Thank you so much for bringing this information to the public. And we will be back next week at 7:00. God bless you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Love you guys.